Welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Will. We're welcomed again at the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museums in Fremont, Ohio, and today is an Ohio story with Phil Spoggy. Phil, who are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about Miles Greenwood, the famous, at least in the 19th century, famous Cincinnati industrialist, foundry owner, business owner.
Great. Well, before we get to Miles Greenwood, let's say thanks to a group, and that is the CWDD Coffee Grinders. Phil's a member of them. I'm a member. There are patrons on Patreon who everybody provides a little bit of money as fits their budget each month, and that combines and makes it so we can travel out of state from Michigan, where we are, to other states and bring you stories like this. If you're interested, take a look below. There's bonuses for patron members. So, Phil, Miles Greenwood, you say he is universal. Give us the backstory. What does Miles do for the war effort?
Well, born in 1807, New Jersey, his family would move west like so many other families do. His father was kind of a restless soul. They settled in Cincinnati, would move up near Dayton, Ohio, try a farm, Indiana, back to Cincinnati. He would apprentice in the iron trade in Pittsburgh in the 1820s, 1830s. And by 1852, he is the leading iron foundry manufacturer in the Midwest. He is famous. His most famous article is his butt hinges, which are the hinges that go in the door. And he is a tremendous civic-minded citizen. He also developed the first practical steam fire engine and was the first fire chief of the city of Cincinnati.
Great. So he is both a metal worker, an entrepreneur, and a civic leader, and believes in civic cause.
He is that kind of big. He's a big man, big, strong, strapping man, as you would expect an iron foundry owner who, this country was basically built on those type of guys.
Well, war breaks out. He doesn't go to the front. What does Greenwood do?
Well, war breaks out, obviously April 12th, and by April 25th or so, the state of Ohio has a new major general of militia by the name of George McClellan. And McClellan knows Greenwood, and he will go to him and say, we need arms, and everybody wants the new technology, the mini rifle. And everybody was clamoring for the infield rifle, musket, the P-53, mainly because of the Crimea War and the great press that we had about the effectiveness of the mini rifle.
Sure, and of course McClellan's part of that, having been, before he left the Army, to be a railroad man where he probably met Greenwood. He's an observer over in the Crimea.
So they're friends. The state of Ohio, from 1808 to the start of the Civil War, under the Militia Act of 1808, which every year each state would get a certain number of arms for the militia, they had been issued about 30,000 arms, and when the war broke out, they could find 5,000.
That's a pretty
big shortage. The first call up of troops is 75,000 for the country. Ohio's quote is 13,000. We reply with more than 20,000, and they need arms. And there's just not many arms. So we get some from the federal government. State of Illinois is leveraged out of 5,000 smoothbore muskets by James Garfield, mainly because they had taken over the St. Louis Arsenal. So we're gathering up arms, but they're the model 1816/22 smoothbore musket, which has been converted from flint to percussion, or the new model percussion musket, which is the model 1842 musket. All of these are smoothbores. So McClellan says to Greenwood, can you rifle the smoothbores to bring them up to the new technology?
Sure. Well, let's stop for just a second. You're a shooter by hobby for over 50 years with the NSSA. For those who are watching who don't know the effective difference between a smoothbore and a rifled, what does this new technology of being able to fire a rifled musket as fast as an old rifle, what does rifling compared to smoothbore do?
Well, a smoothbore cartridge at that period was what they call a buck and ball cartridge, which was one 64 caliber round ball and 3 31 caliber buckshot. Okay, very effective within 100 yards. Very effective. The mini bullet, or I like to call it the Harper's Ferry bullet, was effective out to 400 or 500 yards.
Of course, developed in America by Burton.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So that's one of my other things about James Burton and Harper's Ferry ball. I really like that terminology. Anyhow, so the accuracy was what they were after. Now, on the face of it, it's going to say, well, these firearms are more accurate. They're going to make the old tactics obsolete and lead to a higher casualty rate. But the truth of the matter during the war is the troops were never trained how to guesstimate distance and how to adjust their sights for distance. And in the chaos of battle, the reality of it is a smoothbore musket might have been just as effective as a rifle musket.
But technologically, the rifle would fire further.
And it's like anything else. These new volunteers wanted the new stuff. If you could have an M1 Garand, you didn't want an 03 Springfield. This is nothing new. Okay.
Or if you want the A-10 to still fly, you put a new avionics package.
Thank you. So this is great. So, Greenwood says, yeah, I can do it. And they shook hands. We've never found a contract. And he did 20 test weapons and they turned out okay. Mm-hmm. And so he began in July of 1861 and the state would send him smoothbore arms. And we've got the ordnance reports. You can just see the flow of smoothbore arms, and then coming right back to the state would be the rifled arms, and 20% were actually sighted. And it's an amazing thing. He did in excess of 24,000 arms from July to November of 1861.
And we've got a pile of them.
Yes,
here.
We do. He would start. We'll start with the 42 model. This is your basic model 1842 smoothbore. They call it, the young soldiers would say the old technology, but these started production in 1844, so that's only 17 years before the war started. Smoothbore, buck and ball. What he would do is he would rifle the arm, and he would put on one of two different rear sights on 20% of them. One would be this long-range infield style rear sight, and then later he would put on this smaller rear sight, cheaper to manufacture. We call it the Indiana sight. We have correspondence that shows that a letter from Greenwood to Oliver Morton asking Oliver Morton to tout his new rear sight to James Ripley, the chief of ordnance, the U.S. Army. Ripley would reply, we don't need that now because production is ramped up of the model 1861 Springfield rifle musket and imports are starting to come in, so there's no need to rifle these other arms at the time.
The other sight reminds me a lot of an Enfield sight.
Yeah, the first sight is what they call, and they use the terminology, the Enfield style rear sight. So now they've modified these arms like in the Enfield style. Now, he also did a larger number. We talked about the 42. This is the model 1816, 1822 smoothbore, which he would take. It is already being converted from flintlock to percussion using what they call the Belgian conversion, which would they put the cone here and remove what they call the flintlock battery on the side. He would use the Enfield style or the Indiana rear sight on those two. And there's 69 caliber also.
Absolutely. And of course, when we had the Krause brothers from Agents Pelican and Campbell, they also termed there was a typology across the 16s, type 1, type 2, and type 3, and he would have seen all of them.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Probably more type 2 and 3.
Okay,
prioritize type 2. But anyhow,
at the end of the day, an American-made 69 caliber get it rifled.
And also different makers from the Army, Harper's Ferry, Springfield, and from the contractors too.
Does he do anything to the ramrods?
He cups the ends of them so they'll accept the nose of the conical ball. So you'll see the ramrods are cupped and not the flat ramrod end that they would use with the smoothbore. With them buck and ball.
Makes it easier to get onto the unweighted bullet, the Burton bullet, and shove it down range. Are any of these weapons identified?
Yes, we have one that's identified to George Wade. George Wade was a soldier from Knox County, Ohio. He was in the 13th Missouri, which would later become the 22nd Ohio in the summer of 1862. Why? Because we had the excess of troops, and a lot of our troops were formed into regiments in other states.
And so they form in Missouri because you had too many men, but you were able to bring them back into Ohio service.
Yeah, they did. After Shiloh, they fought at Shiloh as the 13th Missouri, and in the summer of 62, they were changed to the 22nd Ohio. Ohio wanted credit, too, for the troops that were in other state service.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a numbers game, too, so they did want credit for those troops. So George Wade, he carried this firearm. He would be wounded at Shiloh, would lose his leg, would end up after the war spending the rest of his life a lot of times in the Dayton National Home or the National Home up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin,
Okay.
back and forth. He was a baker during that time, and he would die in the late 1800s, and he's buried at Green Lawn Cemetery in Columbus.
So he's a baker pre-war, or he's working as a baker in the hospitals?
Yes.
Okay, both.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So he is able to take a trade back up while being a soldier.
And he, like a lot of the soldiers in the soldiers' home, he had a lot of problems with adjustments. So there's some transfers and moving around, and he left for a while and came back. So, yeah, soldier's heart. Soldier's heart. Yep.
Which today we know as PTSD.
Yep.
The struggle of coming back after men did what we asked them to do as a country.
But we had a couple of years ago some friends of ours, and we took the firearm to the 22nd Ohio, 13th Missouri Monument, Shiloh, near where he was shot. So that's a pretty neat experience. That trip to Shiloh was very meaningful to do that and to hold it there and to know in this area he had been shot.
Well, as we turn back toward Greenwood, does he do more for federal service than just muskets, or is this what he's known for?
Well, he tries. When the Ohio contract ended in November 61, he tries to get other contracts. He had already been making a lot of the gun carriages, a lot of the furniture for the each class ironclads, the riverclads. He had done that. He did about 160-ish artillery pieces, from 6-pounder smoothbores to 6-pounder rifled James.
Is he casting them?
Yep, casting them. And he did a bunch of Napoleons and some howitzers. Today, if you go to Battlefield, if you look on the end of the trunnions, it says Miles Greenwood, Cincinnati, Ohio. I hunt down Greenwood guns on battlefields. At Gettysburg, there's 3 of them on Stevens Knoll that have been adjusted to look like, they call them false Napoleons by the War Department, and they always put them together because that way you can't tell they're not real Napoleons. 1862, he gets a contract to build a monitor on the Ohio River.
Wow.
Called the Tippecanoe. Because of red tape, cost overruns, his factory burning down, they didn't launch the Tippecanoe until 1866, which is a little late for the war.
Yes.
He was never really made whole on the contract cost overruns. It went into the 1870s. By that time, he was getting older. He started to sell off some of his factory, his businesses. He had 2 sons that didn't do as well as their dad did in the family business, and he would end up dying in the 1880s.
Which he's in his 70s. That's a good length of.
Yeah, he was 78, I believe. Yeah,
okay.
He had a good run, really did. But what's interesting today is how many people, when I speak at roundtables on Greenwoods in Ohio, I always ask, who's heard of Miles Greenwood? And usually it may be 1 or 2 people. And even in Cincinnati, I was down there and I spoke, and just a few people would raise their hands. And most of it is in connection with the fire department and his being a fire chief. And I believe there's a Miles Greenwood Society, fire society down there too. So he's really a story untold. But when you figure out that he has 24,000 of his arms were issued to Ohio troops, and it's hard to see them in images because these always look like smoothbores, and the way most soldiers hold them, you never can see, first, if there are a rear sight, and B, if it's rifled in a smoothbore, it looks like a smoothbore.
But this is heavily an 1861 stopgap.
Yes.
How many men does Ohio send?
In 61, I'll go to 61, they're going to probably send about 50,000 men.
And okay. Greenwood muskets?
24,000.
1 and 2.
Yep. We have identified about 25 or 26 regiments that were issued Greenwoods. The rest of them would have infields or some of the imports. But you have to remember that the flow of the infields and the flow of the imports really didn't start until late summer, fall of 61. So you'll see a lot of regiments that were formed in the end of 61 actually not get their arms until early 62.
Sure. Now, it's done and it's gotten into the men's hands. How are they received by the soldiers?
Mixed reception. Some soldiers thought they were absolute junk. Other soldiers, Garfield wrote that they were a wonderful weapon with wonderful range and great penetrating power because of being a 6.9 caliber versus the 58. Mixed reviews. I can show you probably 50-50. Okay. I think a lot of the soldiers if you got the 1816s or 1822s and the lock dates were, 1820s or 1830s, that's old. I got an old gun. I want an infield, infield rifle musket or the new technology.
Well, we're here at Hayes Library and Museums. I know Rutherford wrote about them. What was his thoughts on
He liked them. Yeah. Yes. He thought they were a good, serviceable arm. Some soldiers would say they're a bit clumsy in appearance. They served well into 1862.
Well, as we wrap it up, it's always a big thing for us at the Digest, not just to look at history artifacts, but to look at the stories that go back to whether it's Wade, whether it's Greenwood. Let's bring this all together from the men who carried it to the man who made sure that they could carry rifled weapons. Where does this leave you with Greenwood?
I think that he is a great untold story of the American Civil War. And I think also that you have to consider that no other state had a guy like Greenwood who would shake a hand with a guy, 2 weeks after the war started and say, I can do this. And then he did. He made a big difference in arming Ohio troops. 5 regiments of Indiana troops got Greenwood's too. And you have to remember in 1861-62, it seems like a lot of the Eastern armies got a lot of the new 61 Springfields coming out, and the Western armies were stuck with the second and third class arms. So this arm really made a difference for those boys going into 1862.
And talk with me a little bit about the ability to take the previous military technology and update it. Because the thing I think about is with between 800,000 and 900,000 1816 Springfields, the United States Army goes from a standing army of 16,000 men, and then right after Sumter, the new Confederacy calls for 75,000, and Lincoln calls for 75,000. Your weapons need multiplies by 10.
Yeah, they sure do. And the northern inventories of actually the 3 basic arms that were in the inventory in 1861, the federal inventories, were the 42 models, the 1816/22 models, with the conversion, some flintlocks, and Mississippi rifles too, okay? And the new 55 rifle musket series and rifle series, which actually didn't begin production till 1857, and then production was slow. And then in 1860, John Floyd, who was the U.S. Secretary of War, sent a lot of arms to Southern armories. There's a whole big story about that. So the Northern armories really didn't have the arms to meet the crush of volunteers. And there's all sorts of correspondence, especially from the governors of the northern states, just calling on the ordnance department, you guys send us, we need guns. We don't have guns. We need guns. We need guns. We need guns. And this is where Greenwood came in to arm these guys, especially in 61, to get it done, to provide good arms. They could provide the smoothbores, but they wanted the rifle musket technology.
Well, Phil, I want to say thanks to you for bringing this in. I know Mike Foley, another patron, has brought another of these pieces in. Thank you for sharing this part of your collection and this part of your research with us.
It's a great story. And, again, you don't do it by yourself. Mike's got some great stuff. And my friends John Holland and Paul Davies and Jim Brenner, all 3 researchers that have really helped us put the story together. It's good. When you start studying the Civil War, you'll hear the Northern troops had Springfield rifle muskets and the Southern troops had Enfield, and that's where it stops. But the arms story is just amazingly wonderful and diverse.
And here's a big part of Ohio's
story. Yep, big part of Ohio's story.
Well, thank you for spending your time with Civil War Digital Digest. We hope you got a little connection out of one state in the Union and one man who stepped up and on a handshake in 1861 said, I can help with this part of the war effort, and he went on to do it. Thanks for spending time with us. We'll see you next time.